Reddit, what's the most unhygienic thing you've seen experienced? I work at an optometrist and the amount of people I've seen lick their contact lenses before putting them in thetis is atrocious. Friend of mine was visiting a nomad family while doing research in the Mongolian countryside. She watched the young daughter milking a goat. The goat shat right into the milk pail. Daughter scooped the crap out and continued milking. That milk was served with dinner. Homemade chocolate milk. An elderly woman urinated while standing in line at Home Depot. I looked down and saw her legs, which were the filthiest legs I've ever seen in my life. I don't think she was homeless. She was in a housecoat and slippers. But I really don't think she should have been alone. Whatever the case, I now scrub my legs really hard in the shower. I never scrub my legs. The soapy water running down cleans them. Years ago, I worked at Wendy's while in college. The day shift manager had his 9-month-old kid behind the counter near the carry-out window. He stuck his finger right in the tray of mayo that was used to make customers' hamburgers, then into his kid's mouth so he could laugh about the expression his kid made. Then he stuck the same finger in the ketchup and then the mustard, just so he could hee-haw at his kid's reactions. Meanwhile, low-level employees worked around him to make hamburgers to give to unsuspecting customers. All I could think of was the breeding ground of germs in that kid's mouth and how many people could get sick from his unhygienics. My boyfriend doesn't own toenail clippers. He has a designated foot knife that he uses to cut off his toenails. Ryan, if you're reading this, you're an animal. Your boyfriend is actually Frank Reynolds. My mom was a totally incompetent parent who never really understood you have to teach kids things, instead of them just learning it all through osmosis. And so after she stopped bathing me when I was 6, I went almost 10 years without ever washing my body. I just let the water run over me in the shower and assumed that was enough, because all she did for me was pour water over my head and let me soak in the tub. My skin was constantly covered in a layer of itchy, wet dust. I had zits all over my body. It was horrible and disgusting, and I finally only realized what was happening when I was a teenager online and saw people making jokes about how white people don't use washcloths or loofahs. True story. It was so bad that if I got out of the shower and scratched my leg, a wet grey gunk would peel off my skin and catch under my fingernails. In my lack of understanding, tiny me just figured that was how dead skin worked. Now I scrub all over with a big frothy loofah full of soap every time I shower, and it's absolutely glorious. My mom used to clean houses for a living. A woman had been evicted from the property and we went to clean it. Pretty standard. This house was not freaking standard. It was vacated by a woman who apparently was a veteran, but had been unable to pay utilities for several weeks or months. She hadn't been using the toilet. She'd cut a hole in the floor and had been defecating into the basements for long enough that the entire basement floor was covered in crap in the middle of a humid Missouri summer. My mother threw up when she originally opened the door to the house because of the smell. The woman was a smoker, and the walls had that sticky feeling to them that had absorbed the ungodly stench. You could smell the house from the sidewalk. I hope your mum shut the door and refused to clean it. You need proper hazard gear to clean up that much human waste. One morning, there was a yellow washcloth on my toothbrush. I thought that was kind of gross, but not super freaked out. I brushed me teeth, and I thought I tasted throw up, so I just threw it out. Later in the day, my little sis says that she threw up in the middle of the night, then cleaned it up with a yellow washcloth. Then that washcloth ended up on my toothbrush. Still makes me cringe. I used to live next door to this lovely Mormon family. Nicest folks you could ever hope to meet. That said, they had some weird preoccupation with breeding and the mom was too constantly pregnant, and therefore exhausted and nauseated, to do much in the way of cleaning. And given they had 5 kids, 6 by the time they moved, 2 cats, a tank full of fish, bred cage upon cage full of hamsters, and kept a mated pair of German shepherds, who had puppies the day they were intended to move. There was a lot to clean up. Their oldest daughter was 12 when I met them, and had already taken on the role of surrogate mom to her younger siblings. She could feed, bathe, dress and change them, but doing all that, seeing to it that everyone's homework and her own got done, and cleaning the entire house was simply too much for her to handle on her own. That house was next level, though. The trash can would go unemptied for weeks at a time, until trash was literally overflowing onto the floor. Dishes sat so long they'd get crusted to the counters. Once I was making the kids a snack in the kitchen and saw a roach in the sink. The oldest girl brushed that off, saying as long as they don't touch the food it's okay. Yeah, turns out sometimes they got in the oven too. The littlest kids shared a room, and sometimes if they fell asleep playing they'd literally lie down where they were, on the 2-foot thick layer of stuffed animals, toys and dirty clothes on their floor. Once the dog had diarrhea on a sofa pillow and the mom's response was to toss it out in the backyard where the kids, sometimes, played. When they finally moved out, my mom was recruited to help clean the place up for the next family. Turns out the bathroom walls were actually pink, not brown like we thought. Worked on an ambulance. Got a call for cardiac arrest following a well check at an apartment. Police radioed and said no lights or sirens. Man appears to be dead several days. We get there and his apartment was something straight out of Hoarders. Trash piled 6 inches to 4 feet high. Roaches everywhere. Old bottles of orange juice capped up and swollen about to bust with mixes of pee and old orange juice. Pee and various empty liquor bottles. Once again, roaches trying to crawl up into your pants with every step. Sad scene. BC. His wife had died some years back apparently and no one knew he lived in this manner. Had a supervisor position at a blue collar job. Truck was well kept when we looked through it trying to find family contact info. As far as anyone knew he had no family surviving after his wife passed. And there he was naked, dead on a pile of garbage where the kitchen met the living room. Stiff and starting to swell some. Large man too. Was very difficult to get him into a body bag. Skin was starting to get that slick oily sheen from decomposition. Just wanted to burn everything I wore after that scene. Probably would put that up there with the worst. My mom saw someone at a buffet get a salad, put dressing on the salad, lick the salad dressing spoon, then put the spoon back in the dressing container. And this is why I don't eat at buffets. My roommate last year complained that the showers were never warm, and so never took any. Our room reeked of old food and sweat. His nails were perpetually long and hair was always greasy. Basically think of your average 130 pounds white knight, and that's him. Maybe not the most unhygienic, but I work at a very small store so when someone comes in that smells, the whole store smells. One customer comes in quite frequently, is very overweight, and uses a walker to get around because he had a double knee replacement. During the summer, it can get up to the 90s in our area and I literally don't think this man showers. So, he comes in a few times a week to sell items back to the store. We're a second-hand store, but I really think he just comes in to chat. His clothes are always tattered and torn and covered in stains. He comes in, leans on the counter, and sweats buckets onto our counters. He stays anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes and plants himself right in the front of the store. The smell also, oh my god, it literally smells like someone dumped cat pee all over this man, and then rolled him up into a dumpster, and then threw him into a steaming hot pile of fertilizer. I have a hard time working the register when he is in because I can't handle the smell. The whole store actually reeks when he leaves and we have to keep the doors open and Febreze it. We also need to wipe down and disinfect the counters because there will be pools of horrid smelly sweat on it. It isn't so bad in the winter but he still reeks. I don't think he's showered in at least a year. My stomach gets in knots when I see him coming in because I know what is about to follow. I also don't think he's homeless. He has a car so he has to come from somewhere, but who knows. Please shower if you need one, for the sake of cashiers everywhere. A customer wanted to sample our self-serve soup at the deli I work at. Instead of asking, even though we don't give samples, I had to stop her from drinking directly out of the ladle. I worked in an where rescue brought in a prostitute who overdosed. When putting in a urinary catheter we noticed cash in her bag. Makes me question every paper currency I have ever held. My son had a blowout diaper recently. I was covered from shoulder to wrist in crap and then he decided to touch it and then my lip. I was freaking out. I was working on an oil platform. Since there were a ton of people working, they had a wee boat to keep the extra help including yours truly. We hit some bad weather and spent 2 days out in the open seas until we hit some smooth water. Some highlights. The blood. There was blood everywhere. Everyone's sheets were covered in blood. Bloody towels. and bloody pants. The reason was the high thresholds on the ship. If you weren't paying attention and under stress, well, it was really easy to cut yourself up on some pretty nasty ones. Many of the showers didn't have the drain at the low point. I assume this is only due to the idiocy of the builders. The results were several days worth of accumulated shower water, with a weird combination of body hair, poop, and soap slowly gyrating from side to side. We had no fresh food, so we were hitting the canned stuff. The highlights included canned pig kidney and canned big butt octopus. No work and no prostitutes equals a lot of pent-up sailors. The break room, nice room with a TV and a bunch of couches, slowly degraded into a bunch of shirtless Italian sailors smoking cigs and throwing trash on the ground. Relief came when we hit land. They actually had a fenced-in area for us to walk around in, sort of like a prison yard, and it was awesome. Years ago at Kmart, me and a buddy were in the checkout line behind the smelliest man either of us had ever encountered. He was a big guy, maybe 400 pounds, with dirty skin and clothes. He smelled like a rotting deer carcass. It was bad. His odor lingered after he paid and left. Everyone was talking about it in disbelief after he left, trying to clear the smell out of the store. I knew a girl who used to make her kid wear the same diaper for several days because diapers were expensive and she was trying to make the pack last. Guy in my old dorm would literally sit in the lounge area 24/7 and play League, to the point where he would even sleep there. Side note, he didn't actually live in that building. He claimed to be simultaneously descended from Russian royalty, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and his family owned farmland in a still pagan part of Ireland where all dirty Catholics were eaten and virgin giving was still a thing, and was the super cringy sort of furry. Needless to say, he never freaking showered, brushed his teeth, shaved, to say nothing of going to class. This sucker smelled bad. How bad? The parlor area was huge, about 40x 15 feet at the least, and you could smell him as soon as you walked in. His scraggly neck butt had bits of food in it that would randomly fall out when he spoke, and he never trimmed his nails, which were like fricking bugles on his fingertips. Ra eventually wound up walking in on him fricking one of the couches, and he was summarily kicked out of the school. The couch, however, is still there, in the same building. My roommate, or one of my suitemates, no one ever admitted to it, spilled dry protein powder on the soap dish in the bathroom before leaving for spring break. Instead of cleaning it up like a functional human being, he left it to fester over the next week or so, and by the time we came back, it had decayed into this disgusting, smelly brownish hard tar that was almost impossible to remove. Ick. Helped my cousin move into a house. The room he was moving into had jars and bottles and jugs all over the floor, all of them full of human urine. A few months later, I helped him move out of the same house. Most of the urine vessels were still there when he moved out. He might have even made some more of his own. The curse was passed on. Cruising down the streets in India, looking out the window seeing kids pooping in the drain ditch, with their feet literally in the water running down the street, which is touching their poop, and the other kid is 10 featuring up the street who is also pooping is now standing in the water running off the other kid's poop. It was gross and it smelled like poop everywhere. Knew a person who worked in a small, family-owned bakery. They would shower once a year, on Christmas, as a gift to their mother. Aside from that, they never bathed. The problem is, even though it was a small bakery, it is a major name locally, and celebrities will send out for the goods they make. They have frequently been in the news, and I know for a fact that the owner's son wiped his butt with his own hand. Maybe that's the secret recipe. Once put my son down for a nap without a diaper on. Wife's idea. IDK. At some point he woke up and pooped in his crib. I walked in to find him bashing poop around with his hands, rubbing it all over his sheets, the crib, and the wall next to the crib. It was a disaster. I'm a sleep technologist and I had a patient who had such thick dandruff that I had to chip away at it in order to get to the scalp. I also had a patient try to wear a CPAP mask they brought from home. It had chunks of God knows what embedded into it, almost like he pushed an Alpo dog food. The headgear was an old underwear band. I promptly threw it away and gave him a mask and told him I never wanted him to bring a mask like that again, and if he couldn't afford a new one to call our office and we could give him one of our to be donated masks. When my brother was 6 months old, our family cat crap all over his face. After several days of not seeing the cat around the house, I found out that my dad had given him away. My sister thinks it's hygienic and healthy to eat her own period blood, so I'm gonna have to go with that. What the ever-loving frick? My dad eats his dinner with his fingers and gives some to the dog and lets him lick his fingers, then will go back to eating his dinner. I have a friend whose whole family is like that. He tried to explain it saying that dogs' mouths are cleaner than a human's. I watched the same animal lick its balls not 20 minutes ago. Pizza place I worked at. They went through a conveyor oven to cook. The problem was that there was no surface for them to feed onto when they came off of the conveyor. So if nobody was watching, they'd hit the floor. Myself and the few workers there knew that this was a crap. Start making another. I'll inform the customer that there was a mishap, and we'll give a discount to moment. So there was one time this happened while the boss owner happened to be there. The pizza came out and plopped cheese side down on the floor. Side note, dirty goddamn floor. I, wanting to pick it up with as little mess as possible, shoved a pizza tray underneath of it super quickly. I picked it up and flipped it over. It was still pretty much intact and there was only a bit of sauce on the floor. The boss has been watching the whole time. I set it on the counter next to the oven and turned my attention to the next pizza that was on its way out. When I turned back, the boss was just staring at the floor pizza on the counter. I took care of the other one, and then went to get a towel to clean up the floor. When I came back, he was finishing putting on a few fresh toppings and a bit of cheese before putting it back in the oven. I was dumbfounded. My co-worker looked like he wanted to murder the guy. Neither of us said anything though. We both regretted it ever since. It was one of those things where we couldn't decide if challenging the boss was a good idea. He was someone who would cut corners and do anything to save a buck. Like serve a pizza that had been on the floor, fully on the floor, face down, for upwards of a minute. And that's exactly what happened. He cut that pizza, took it out to a table, and served it to paying human customers. If I ever work with food again and am put in a similar situation, I'm not going to stay quiet. Thankfully, this was a non-chain, not very popular place, and probably is as bad as it gets where I'm from, so I don't think it'll happen again. I was doing some short-term volunteer work in Mozambique. At the end of the project, the villagers slaughtered a goat for a celebratory feast. They hung it from a tree upside down and slit its throat. Fine. They had a bucket underneath to catch the blood. Okay, whatever. But they didn't kill it super quick. So in its death throes, it urinated and pooped too. Into the blood bucket that went. The sauce the meat was cooked in was made from that bucket. And it was beyond the height of rudeness to refuse to eat it, especially since these people didn't have much meat, and chose to have a whole goat for us, and we had worked with them for a few weeks and bonded. I ate the goat, blood, urine and goat dropping stew, as little as possible, but I ate it. We all did. Shudder. I had to take a friend to the hospital when he got back from Morocco. He got E. coli from some type of goat sacrifice as well. 3 days in the hospital to keep from insulting the host family. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.